I recently switched to the iPhone 16 Pro, and while I was in the process of trying to decide where to go, I had access to the 16 Pro Max. And both of these devices, like on the surface, they have the same camera, they have the same performance. The only change between the two is the screen size, their weight, and then also battery life. So naturally, coming from the 13 mini, one of the things that's always going to stand out to me is the weight. And even though if you look on paper, right, there's a zero point 0.2 inch difference between the 15 Pro and the 16 Pro. So 6.1 inches, 6.3. And then the 15 Pro Max was at 6.7, and now the 16 Pro Max is at 6.9 inches. And that might not seem like a lot, but when it comes to like actually handling the devices, it makes a huge difference. Like when I had both of these devices, I was in Morocco and I was alternating between the 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max, just trying to gauge my thoughts on both of them. And every time I had the 16 Pro Max, I just couldn't handle the weight of it. And when I went to look at the 15 Pro Max that I had as well, it's such a big difference between the two. So this actually got me to go back to the stainless steel models of the 14 series. So the 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max. So if you look at the weight difference between the iPhone 14 Pro, that was 7.27 ounces. And then you look at the weight of the iPhone 16 Pro, it's 7.03 ounces. So there's only a 0.24 difference. So that's the reason why you notice that weight change all of the sudden, because of that slight bump in the screen and battery size. Whereas if you look at the jump when they first made the switch to titanium in the 15 Pros, the 14 Pro 7.27 ounces, the 15 Pro 6.6 ounces. So there's a huge difference, right? So that's why like when everyone got the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max in their hands, they noticed that weight change right away. Now, similarly, let's do the same with the Pro Max. So if you go back to the iPhone 14 Pro Max, it came in at 8.47 ounces. The 16 Pro Max comes in at 7.99 ounces. So between the two, there's a 0.48 ounce difference. But again, if you look at the 14 Pro Max at 8.47 and then the 15 Pro Max, that came in at 7.81 ounces, making for a 0.66 ounce of a difference. Now, typically, I'm not a numbers person when it comes to reviews and all these benchmarks and everything, but the reason I went back and looked at this is because in just handling the two devices, it felt like the 16 Pro and Pro Max went in reverse this year and got a little bit heavier. This could be a reason why we're getting all those rumors of the iPhones getting slimmer next year, so that way they can further reduce the weight. So how that translated for me personally is what I noticed last year is that I could still manage the 15 Pro Max, because even though it wasn't totally comfortable for me because I'm used to a smaller device, but I could still do it. But with the 16 Pro Max, I just can't. I get that pain in my pinky and right here in my wrist, and it just becomes too much for me to handle. So that's why, for me, ultimately, the decision came down to going for the 16 Pro. So even if you're a Pro Max user, one thing to look at is that because the 16 Pro has gotten a bigger screen now, maybe you can downsize and have an overall more comfortable experience. Because like most of the people that I see with the Pro Max devices, they're making that weight and size compromise just simply because they want a bigger screen and they watch more content on the go. So everything they're doing revolves around that screen, and most of them are not able to handle the device one-handed. Whereas with something like the 16 Pro, that is totally doable. Now, speaking of the screen, that is actually where it got difficult for me, because I've been watching a lot of American football these days because the season is ongoing. Pretty soon, playoffs will be here. And so I've been watching a lot of YouTube TV on my phone. And every time I was doing it on the 16 Pro Max, I was like, man, this is nice. Like having that 6.9 inch screen size is great. I mean, when I got my first tablet, it was a Google Nexus 7, and the name 7 referred to the 7-inch screen size. So just to And what's crazy sometimes what I think is that if I go back, I'm like, that was a tablet? Like, how was that a tablet when the 16 Pro Max is just a phone? Or if you look at other phones with that similar screen size, it's just mind blowing. So if you are someone that watches a lot of content, or maybe you play games, that is also something that I do, then having that extra screen real estate is so nice. But overall, for me, it just comes down to the day to day experience, right? Like when I am watching the content and I just kind of have the phone on the side, or maybe I'm using a kickstand to prop it up or something, it's nice to have that in the 16 Pro Max. But when it comes to day to day usability, that's where the 16 Pro takes the cake for me. Another thing that's really nice about having a Pro Max device is the fact that it's got really good battery life. Now, again, coming from a smaller device, that is something that you really enjoy. Just not having to worry about charging a device. But for me personally, I average like sometimes 3.5 hours of screen on time. Other weeks, it's like 2.5. So it just kind of goes up and down, but I try to keep it in that range. And for me, I am able to last the whole day with the 16 Pro and still end my day at that 30% mark. So it's not a problem for me whatsoever. Now, the Pro Max is a different story. If I do the same screen on time, same usage and everything, I'm well above 50%. So I wouldn't even really have to charge overnight, but I still do. So in this category, what you really got to think about is that if you are a power user and let's say you have double the screen time of me, or you just use your phone a lot, whether it's for work purposes or whatever the case is, right? If you really need to be liberated from a charger, then the best thing you can do is go for the Pro Max. But if you, again, want that day to day experience, being able to handle the device in a much easier manner, then the 16 Pro is going to be the right one, or vice versa. So now that you know why I went for the 16 Pro, because everybody's use case scenario is different, right? What suits one person is very different than another. But I want to know what your thoughts are. How did you end up landing on the device model of choice? This was a difficult decision for me, and that's why I wanted to make a video about the process and what I kind of went through. And hopefully you enjoyed this, because if you did, please give it a thumbs up as it'll really help me out. And like always, thank you for your time. Take care, and I will see you in the next video.